Welcome to our tour. We will be touring Germany in the 1800s to see where the Grimm brothers gathered their fairy tales. The people we will visit include Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm, the Hausenflug family in Hanau, the Hausthausen family in Abenberg, and Dorothy Weimann in her hometown, which is present-day Kassel. One artifact that we will discuss is Kinder- und Hausmärchen by the Grimm brothers, and one event we will discuss is German culture before the German nation unification. The Grimms, also known as the Grimm brothers, are Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. The Grimm brothers are known for their contribution to traditional folk tales. Jakob and Wilhelm were born in Hanau, Germany, less than a year apart. Both brothers attended the University of Marburg, where they started studying law. The professor, Friedrich von Savigny, sparked their interest in Germany's past and the structure of German language. This is when they got introduced to Romantic poets such as Achim von Arnim and Clemens Brentano. After the Grimm brothers completed their law degree, they worked in various positions at a library in Kassel, where they continued their linguistic studies. In 1806, they collected and wrote down fairy tales that they heard in Kassel and its surroundings. They also wrote down tales of French origins from Dorothy Weimann. Jakob was intrigued by the way of nature, while Wilhelm put the stories and tales they heard into a pleasantly written style. The work of the Grimm brothers consisted of more than collecting folk tales and fairy tales. Their primary goal was linguistic research. Jakob's comprehensive studies of history and structure of past German language became known as the Grimm Law. After publishing their first folklore book, they went on to work as professors and librarians at the University of Göttingen. In 1835, they published German mythology. In 1837, King Ernest Augustus of Hanover annulled the liberal constitution, which was implemented in 1833. The Grimm brothers protested against the abrogation, which led to the deportation of Jakob and Wilhelm. They went back to Kassel. After their deportation, the Grimm brothers began to work on a German lexicon. The Deutsches Wörterbuch became very extensive with 33 volumes. The Deutsches Wörterbuch was known as the standard work of origin and history of German words. In 1940, the brothers were invited to Berlin by the King of Prussia. Jakob became a member of the Academy of Science and professor, and Wilhelm received a position as professor as well. Lecturing and working on the German dictionary kept them busy until they died. Wilhelm died in 1859 and Jakob passed in 1863. The Grimms began their career as folklorists by collecting folk songs and oral stories. We will visit people who orally shared folk tales and songs with the Grimm brothers later on in this tour. The brothers split their work pretty equally. Jakob was in charge of compiling oral folklore, and Wilhelm was in charge of rewriting the oral tales into readable form. Wilhelm's ability to adapt oral stories into readable form is impressive because he was able to keep the elements of oral storytelling in his adaptations. These traditional oral elements include rhymes, repetitions, and sayings. The Grimms published their work in their book Kinder- und Hausmärchen, which translates to Children's and Household Tales in English. The cover of the Grimms book is seen on the left of this slide. The title of this book is significant because it shows that the Grimms' target audience was German families. By exposing the younger generation to this collection of tales, these young Germans would be able to pass down these tales to the next generation that followed them. The Grimms' book was published in 3 volumes. The first volume was published in 1812, the second volume was published in 1814, and the third was published in 1822. The collection contains over 200 stories. Many of the stories in the collection, such as Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, and Sleeping Beauty, are considered classic folk tales today. It's likely that these stories would not have been well preserved for the enjoyment of future generations without the Grimm's diligent work. The brothers Grimm's work is impressive, but what exactly motivated them to become folklorists? Well, it's important to keep in mind that Germany was not a united nation during the Grimm's time. In the early 1800s, Germany consisted of multiple principalities and city-states, each with their own norms, figures of authority, and laws. Germany's fragmented borders are seen in the image left of this slide. The Grimms were fascinated that the single thing that united these principalities was a common language, German. The goal of the Grimms was to create a national German identity through the German folk. By collecting folklore throughout the German principalities, the Grimms proved that German-speaking people had a common past and a common culture, despite the fact that Germany was not yet politically united. Now we will visit people who contributed to the Grimms' folktale collection. Let's begin with an upper-class family in Hanau, the Hausenflugs. Ludwig Hausenflug was a politician in the 19th century, and he was the senior minister in the electorate of Hesse. The Hassenpflug family was a family of French Huguenots. The family had 4 daughters, Suzette, Jeanette, Marie, and Amalia. These upper-class maidens contributed greatly to the folklore collection of the Grimm brothers. Suzette was moving out when the Grimm brothers visited and contributed the fewest number of stories. In contrast, Jeanette and Marie were significant contributors to the stories added by the Grimm brothers. These stories include Puss in Boots, Sleeping Beauty, and Red Riding Hood. The last sister, Amalia, became close to the Grimm brothers through their collection of the stories. Now we will visit the Haxtausens in Appenburg, which is near Göttingen. The Haxtausens were a notable upper-class family, to which the 2 Grimm brothers also sought aid in collecting stories. The 2 brothers received help from Ludwig, Sophie, and Anna von Haxtausen. The Haxtausens collected and published folk songs, and Anna was the first to contribute. As the sisters grew older, they lost interest in the project, or they were held back by their husbands from further contributing to the Grimm brothers' tales. Now we will visit an older woman named Dorothy Weimann. She contributed many stories to the Grimm's collection. Dorothy Weimann was born on November 8, 1755, and passed away on November 17, 1855. As written in the second preface of their fairy tales, the Grimm brothers noted her as a farmer from the village of Niedersveien near Kassel, who told them the most beautiful fairy tales. After her death, Dorothy was buried in the church cemetery at the defense tower of the town. Much of the modern town would eventually name its streets after Dorothy's tales. This is a touching way to celebrate Dorothy's contribution to Kassel and German culture. Some people found it strange that the Grimms heavily featured Dorothy in their work. After all, the Grimms could have featured the young and wealthy woman of the Hassenpflug family or the Haxtausen family. It turned out that Dorothy was heavily featured because she impressed the Grimms with her consistent storytelling. The Grimms met Dorothy in 1813, and she told them over 40 tales. She was such an amazing storyteller that every time she told a story, the story was always the same. Word for word, she never changed a thing. Her stories were based on mostly French tales because her ancestors were from France. The Grimms were so impressed by Dorothy that many of the stories in the Grimm's collection are stories that she told them. Thank you for going on our tour. We learned about the lives of the Grimm brothers, the Grimm's career as folklorists, and the woman who contributed to the Grimm's collection. We also learned the important role the Grimms played in the preservation of German folklore. Hopefully you'll think about the Grimms the next time you read a fairy tale or watch a fairy tale movie. Thank you.